Radio Retro Future.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Radio Retro Future, where I, Bonsart Bokel, discuss steampunk and anything retrofuturism. I'm also the creator of a series called the Association of Ishtar. As a matter of fact, we are in a pre-launch of our next Kickstarter of The Casket Girls, a military steampunk about female mecha pilots set in the aforementioned universe. Because all our books are illustrated, I make a lot of art commissions, and one of the style I'm always on the look for is film noir and expressionism. Matter of fact, right now we are doing an art contest with the theme Cyberpunk in the past. Now, when I mention these two terms, visual artists often get intimidated, which some people really got intimidated by, and this happened because I was under the naive assumption that people with an interest in science fiction, steampunk, and, well, the illustrative arts, I assumed naively that they would know what these terms meant and how important they are to the cyberpunk genre overall. Obviously, I was wrong, and this also would explain why we have such poor choices for visual design such as games as Cyberpunk 2077. Because I would like to see both of these visual styles thrive, I'm making this video. And I suppose this is a good segue to attend you to my REAM stories page, where you can follow me for free and get weekly stories. Or you can support my efforts and gain access to extra content, including the full short story collection, published ebooks, and 3D printable miniatures. You can even become part of our setting and have your avatar be included in our video credits. Know that all the income from this REAM page goes to our illustrators who are making the art for the show and our books. And with that out of the way, let's continue. Now, this video will be a practical Cliff Note version, for I'll need more time to go into the full history of Expressionism and how it developed throughout pop culture's history. But yeah, for that I'll need more time and possibly help with the script. Once upon a time, when people went to the theater, a set was just that. An ad hoc environment for actors to perform and play in. It was there to visualize where the scene takes place, to increase the viewer's immersion, and little else. But then, in the wake of the First World War, a visual style emerged in Germany. Expressionism that used abstract rather than realistic depictions to visually tell stories. In Expressionism, environments were no longer passive backgrounds, but active players in the story. One of the best examples of this is probably the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, where all the cityscapes are very dreamlike. The rooms are like fever dreams, and the locations, like this office, look like in a generally oppressive place for all those who engage in bureaucracy. More modern examples of such surrealism can be Inception, although the details are far more grounded in reality. For contrast, realism shows us characters and their environments as they are in real time. Kinda speaks for itself. Lightning, sound, movement, the passing of time are all acts as we expect them to. We can add expressionist techniques to the scene and to world building to create a particular atmosphere, which you'll probably recognize in this scene. This is a great example of expressionist style techniques in a more realistic sense. First, we have the size of the two ships, especially the low angle emphasizing the size and length of both of these vessels, symbolizing in this case the reach of the Empire. The second is the shape of the corvette, which is rounded with light earth tones like a gentle ladybug. And then this massive Star Destroyer on the other hand is dark grey and with its angular sharp corners like that of a knife, making it seem hostile and imposing. You don't need a text scroll to explain who is the good guy and the bad guy here, and it's not just accomplished through ship design but also photography and lighting. Traditional expressionism is how we use abstract visuals to create atmosphere and convey deeper ideas. However, these techniques are seeped into other genres and styles as well. Are you familiar with Batman the Animated Series? That is steeped with expressionist techniques. The contrast between light and dark, day and night, the choice of architecture are all very intentional, especially the use of shadows, but more on those later. Let's talk about architecture first. I made two videos on both Art Deco and Art Nouveau. There I explained the design principles behind each style, but also how these are used in media. Art Deco in particular projects futurism, status and timelessness. It's no wonder that this style is often used in films and video games to convey this to the audience. Art Nouveau, on the other hand, is far more often used for horror and uncanny environments due to its asymmetry, flowing forms and naturally inspired shapes. In combination with the right lighting, it can create a dreamlike, very gothic atmosphere such as the early Tim Burton movies do. And that is why we see pure Art Deco rarely outside of Steampunk, and even then it's often just a one-on-one copy of the real thing. But what does that have to do with Cyberpunk? I already mentioned Batman the Animated Series and the Use of Shadows. I personally grew up with the Adam West show that, well, also has an expressionist element. That being the comic book style sound effects to give the viewers that they are really watching a comic book play out before their eyes. And my 6-year-old self really enjoyed this. But then the animated series came, and it's probably one of the most influential pieces of superhero media to date. And every Batman film has been trying to be like it since. In particular the last one, where the background and other contains shadows that suspiciously look like Batman. Almost as if he is everywhere. Always watching. And this is how Expressionism is supposed to work. Not to convey a world's reality, but to convey the idea behind the world building. Batman wasn't just the first to do this. This goes all the way back to the 1920s, where we see the shadow of Count Orlok creep up the staircase in Nosferatu. This is not just cool, it's to convey that he is a creature of shadow, and like a shadow he can be vanquished by the sun. And we see a similar motive in Metropolis, where one of the characters gets chased by the villain, represented by his shadow. This becomes so iconic it would inspire very popular pulp figures that you might have heard of, like a vigilante who uses the methods of the criminals to punish them for their crimes. And this vigilante was of course called the Shadow. He is called the Shadow because, you know, he acts like a bad guy who are often represented by shadows, so that's why they call him the Shadow. Anyway, this character would later inspire Batman, and with that we've gone full circle. And that brings us to one of other of Batman's major influences. Film noir. Film noir is a film style that was very popular in the 40s and 50s and almost has become synonymous with American cinema. What sets noir apart from detectives is that the characters go on a journey of, well, self-destruction. Be it Double Indemnity or The Third Man, film noir rarely have a positive ending as the characters go on a wild ride knowing, even with the noblest of intentions, they can't win. Therefore, the environments were often filmed to look oppressive. But the use of these techniques were not entirely inspired by artistic merit alone. Film noir were cheaply made movies. With less money on the line for the studios, these directors had little oversight. It's therefore not surprising that film noir was, for example, one of the first movie genres that had some gay representation. But because of these low budgets, filmmakers also had to be creative. And few things are cheaper to make than shadows. This led to a style of film where every scene would be framed like a horror scene. They did this through restricted film frames, tilted or Dutch angles, high contrast between light and dark, and of course, shadows. Who doesn't know the iconic sight of the hero standing in front of the Venetian blinds and the femme fatale lighting a cigarette in a dark room? This created the knights without armor taking on the challenge of aiding the femme fatale in an often fatal quest. Shadows, the high contrast and gritty, tenseful atmosphere made the actors congeal with their surroundings, and yes, that is exactly what we see reflected in Batman the Animated Series and all of its imitators. Another important influence on the film noir style was censorship. Because filmmakers could not show sex, gore or other taboos, they developed visual euphemisms that are being made fun of today. Scenes like characters smoking in bed or inviting each other for coffee were created in this environment to skirt censorship. However, they pioneered the techniques to create the subtle horror, again through timing, lighting and atmosphere, creating a symbolic rather than a realistic tone. You could argue that Expressionism is environmental storytelling, but that is only a very superficial element of the style. Good Expressionism visualizes deeper and abstract ideas like fear, decay, joy, and the divine. Stuff you don't just have laying around the room, so to speak. And that brings us to Noir's spiritual successor, Cyberpunk. The origins of the name Cyberpunk are often credited to William Gibson, but quite frankly, its roots can be found all the way into 1920s fiction in stories like The Machine Stops. Again, stories with strong expressionist element describing humanity's struggle with modernity and progress. Individuals who had to take on a strangling yet pleasant embrace of near-futuristic innovations. It didn't just explore our relationship with technology, but also what makes us human in the face of unconstrained progress. A futile struggle they had in common with the heroes of film noir. But this subgenre of science fiction didn't really have an aesthetic until the rise of the punk movement in the 1980s and its revolt against technocracy, commercialism alongside the rise of computer technology. Also in the 1980s, neon lighting was considered to be the future, until LED came about. So the pale streetlights were replaced with the neon lighting of corporate billboards. Then in came Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, a neo-noir set in the nearby future based on the book Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. Here we have a police detective struggling with his humanity when he falls in love with a robot, Rachel, who too is coming to terms with her own nature. This is a doomed relationship, as is mirrored in the movie's antagonist portrayed by the always amazing Rutger Hauer, playing another robot on a fruitless quest for longer life. Both these plotlines and visuals embody film noir to a T. Despite being a modest success in its own day that got mixed reviews, it is now a cult classic synonymous with the cyberpunk genre. The street lights may have been replaced with bright neon, the shadows are still there, creating similar claustrophobic environment, entangling in decaying cables and mounds of kipple. Random waste accumulated over years of neglect, like the furniture molding away in your basement. And like the film noir that inspired it, the shadows were meant to hide the terribly crafted miniature sets. In that regard, Cyberpunk builds upon the themes of film noir, using futurism and contemporary punk culture for inspiration. For more details on the Cyberpunk aesthetic and where they went wrong in my opinion, please watch our dedicated video on the topic. But does steampunk continue this tradition? We could point to some symbolism, such as the gears that have been hot glued to many a top hat. Considering many steampunk artists contribute their inspiration to Metropolis, it makes sense that the gears have a expressionist origin. However, for that logic to apply, these gears must be used in either a photographic or world-building sense to count. We see great examples of the use of gears in a cosmic horror animated movie, The Mysterious Explorations of Jasper Borello, which you can still watch on YouTube, that uses gears and spoke wheels to great effect to create a horrific atmosphere. We can also connect the use of gears to the cables littering the environment of classic Cyberpunk. Gears that have stopped turning long ago are a bit similar to the kipple from Blade Runner and other Cyberpunk. However, gears could also be used for Expressionism to great effect. In stage plays, particular cogwheels are very popular because they make amazing moving shadows. Again, we have seen this being applied through visual genres like Bioshock Infinite and again, Batman the Animated Series. But does that mean steampunks could be considered the successors of the Expressionist artists? That is a hard question to answer because nobody ever has set the bar for good steampunk visuals and genre writing. The bar for video games is probably Frostpunk, and for animation, arguably Steamboy. But for movies and even literature, there is no agreed upon standard to which we hold either medium. The Difference Engine might be considered a milestone for the steampunk genre, but there's a reason barely anyone talks about the story. It's certainly not better than William Gibson's more famous work Neuromancer. That said, it's difficult to retrace steampunk's aesthetics to a single source because steampunk borrows from all of them. From Metropolis to classical Star Wars and modern superheroes and Avatar The Last Airbender, each of these have been steampunked. If you ask me who is the steampunk artist par excellence that others should build upon, I don't know. Fantasy has its Frank Rosetta, sci-fi has its Mobius, superheroes its Stan Lee's, but steampunk, Jacob Rosalski was relevant once. Brian Kessinger, the one who made A Girl and Her Octopus, does a lot of Star Wars fan art these days. He did character design on Blue Eye Samurai. That's pretty cool, right? But all those artists have in common they both lean into pop culture and popular history, and that is about it. Hello folks, post-production Bonsart here. So, I recently did something I should have done a long time ago and I finished watching Arcane, the League of Legends series, which by the way, will have a second season by November this year. So I'm looking forward to that. I have a lot to say about this series, so I'll probably make at least one video, maybe even two. In the past I actually started on before I finished watching the series a long time ago, I actually started working on a thing where the story takes a lot of cues from Metropolis. However, watching the second half of the first season, I realized it did a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in this video in regards to the use of architecture, but also expressionist techniques like shadows. I will discuss those at a later date, and with the question like, is this the standard that we should set for steampunk? I think that Arcane is more of a gaslight fantasy. I will talk about that in those videos as well. But regardless, when it comes down to steampunk aesthetics and the use of visual storytelling techniques, I think Arcane deserves a deeper look. So why is that? Is steampunk too niche? Is it too much of an artist movement like Art Nouveau was? I think this requires more investigation at some point, and therefore I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. But before we sign off, please follow our Kickstarter page for the Casket Girls. We don't just offer books, we also are moving on with our RPG. We'll include printable miniatures as well, like this mecha from the upcoming book. The more followers we get, the more content we'll include. Our first goal is 100 followers that will unlock a Kickstarter only cover. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to bid you adieu. And as always, make things your way. Good night.